all, and welcome to this amazing masterclass, Growing Your Business Through Continuous Experimentation. And today we have the famous John. Just to give you a brief about John heads up a UK PMO consultancy, which helps organizations deliver the right things faster. He's over 20 years of experience helping organizations deliver on their business ambitions, with real-world class experience of delivering in organizations small and large, and the breadth of knowledge that comes with an MBA from a leading business school. He helps businesses of all sizes to innovate, deliver, and succeed. So John, the floor is yours, and looking forward to this amazing session.
Thank you ever so much. Right, let me get screen sharing on. There we go. So hopefully you can see my screen now. And it should give you a session, hopefully you can see a session description, which tells you what we're here for. I always like putting this up at the beginning, just in case anyone has kind of accidentally wandered into the wrong Zoom session or has accidentally clicked on the wrong link in LinkedIn and suddenly found themselves here. This is your opportunity to realize, uh-oh, you're in the wrong place, and dive off to something more interesting. Or alternatively, if you are here by accident and this looks interesting, then hang around and see if you can learn something which is fantastic as well. So what we're doing today, we're going through this stuff here. I've got a mixture of we're going out on a mixture of different mediums at the moment. So I believe we're live streaming on LinkedIn, live streaming on Facebook, and also we've got a core group of entrepreneurs who are running their own businesses, starting their own businesses through the incubator program at the core, who are actually on Zoom conversing with us as well. Now, for that small group, we have previously done a deep dive into running business experiments. We've talked through some of the theory, we've talked through some of what those experiments might look and feel like, and they were given some homework at the end of the last session to run their first business experiment themselves between that session and now. Now, caveat, that was only a couple of weeks ago, so the experiments they were asked to do were quick, dirty, ugly, cheap experiments, because I wanted to get the learning out of that process. So when we come to them in a second, I'd like to hear what they've been up to. I would say for anyone else, you can expect some of these to have been complete and utter failures, and that's okay, because that's how we learn. And if we've had some successes and validated some ideas out of those, that's absolutely fantastic. We learn from that as well. Okay, so that's our mission. You've seen what the session's about. Let's get stuck in, shall we? This is what the agenda looks like. So we're going to go through the business experiment model. Again, for those of you that are on the deep dive, this is a bit of a recap and a refresh for you. But for those that are joining for the first time, you can whiz through and catch up with where we are quite quickly. We're going to look at then real world examples from our core entrepreneurs. We're going to look at what the mindset is. So we talk about rapid experimentation as a mindset and what that means. Then we're going to look at moving on from just looking at individual experiments, which is what we've looked at up until now, and actually looking at how we visualize those experiments and how we flow those. So we're looking more about this continuous process of experimentation, how we make that transparent, and how we have a steady flow of experiments running through your growing businesses. And if we're doing that, we're looking at you guys being your own venture capitalists. So you've got a lot of ideas, you've got a lot of assumptions. The key question is, which of those are you investing in? And to help you with that, we're going to look at prioritization strategies. So which are the most important ones to be running with? We're going to take a look again at when experiments go wrong. We're going to build on what we did last time and look at more ways that your experiments can go wrong, because there's always more ways they can go wrong. And then we're going to look at applying everything that you've learned at the top of the 2 hours. So that's our mission. Quite a lot to fit in. Are we all up for it? Looking for some nods or thumbs, or there we go. A few. Good. Fantastic. Okay, let's dive in. So let's start at the beginning and just recap everything. So we're talking about running business experiments in our startup organizations. And the reason we're running business experiments is to remove uncertainty from our business. We're reducing risk by removing uncertainty. And the reason we want to do that, there's several reasons we want to do that. It's so we can get investment in our business on better terms. If our business is less risky and we can show our business is less risky, then you're going to get investment on better terms than you would do if your business was very high risk. It allows you to validate whether your general direction of travel is right. So this is the very, very broad brush. I've got this idea. Am I going in the right direction? And then once you've done that, it's allowing you to refine that and look at it in more detail and confirm with data whether a business idea is actually likely to work. So we're going wide and then getting more focused as we go. And crucially, your time is valuable. You are very, very important people. We want to avoid wasting time and energy on ideas that aren't going to work. So we're running these short experiments to save your time and make sure you're focusing your time on the things that are valuable. We said last time, we're going to validate our assumptions in an agile, cost-effective, and evidence-based manner. And I broke those things down just so we're all talking the same language and we all understand what we mean. Agile is a term that means a lot of things to an awful lot of people, right? So let's just be clear. So by agile, what we mean is we're doing iterative phases of work. So doing regular cycles of work, and we are frequently reassessing and adapting our business plans at the end of each one of those iterations. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about agile. By cost effective, what we're saying are we're using the methods that bring the greatest advantage when the amount spent is considered. Nobody is saying go out and spend a lot of money here. We're saying let's look at the amount we're spending and let's make sure that what we're spending, we get the biggest bang for our buck, as I believe they say in North America. And we're looking for all of our decisions to be evidence-based. And by evidence-based, we mean we're making decisions based on the best available, current, valid, and relevant data. Time is against you with your businesses. The idea that you've got, other people probably have that idea as well, or other people will be getting closer to that idea. What you want to do is get the best current, valid, relevant data you can that allows you to move forward quickly. So this is why we're doing it. And we've got a model that we're following for doing our business experiments. We start off with identifying assumptions. With the core group, we spent quite a lot of time on this last time. If you're starting your own business out, chances are you've got a business canvas, and chances are you've put a whole load of stuff into boxes on a canvas. And what you'll find is what you've written down there are a whole load of assumptions. They could be about whether the market will be interested in your idea. They could be about your supply chain. They could be about where your money's coming from. All of those are assumptions that you want to test and validate. And actually, when you think about it, it's higher level than that almost, because actually your business is an assumption in itself. You've made an assumption that this will work at the very, very broadest sense. It's kind of, if you think about it, it's assumptions based on assumptions all the way down, right? So we've got our assumptions, which is our first step. We've identified those, we're writing those down. And once we've written those down, we're looking at trying to convert those into hypotheses. So we're applying a little bit of scientific rigor to what we're doing here. Our hypothesis statements were ones that were written in a way that they are testable and specific. So we've got an assumption, we're writing that in a we believe that type format, and we're making sure we've got something that is testable. We should be able to get a yes, no at the end of our hypothesis, and it should be specific enough or discrete enough, as we like to say, to be able to assure ourselves that when we're running our test, it's focused on this hypothesis, not a whole load of different things as well. So we're bringing it as tight and as testable as we can. After that, we want to do some prioritization, and we're prioritizing basically on two axes. So is this assumption super important to our business, or is it less important to our business? So we're plotting those on the y-axis there. And for this assumption, do we have evidence already? If we have a lot of evidence already, then it's probably off there to the left. If we're completely lacking in evidence, then it's kind of over to the right. And the area that we're focusing on is that top right-hand quadrant there. These are the experiments that we want. These are the hypotheses that we want to be testing and running experiments on first. With selecting experiments, we went through a number of different experiment types, but crucially, deciding on the right experiment came down to cost, how much it would cost to run the experiment, the evidence strength, the quality of evidence we would get out of running that experiment, and the time that we have. So if you have a year before your next critical decision point, be that before you run out of money or before you're meeting with somebody again or whatever that might be, then you've got quite a bit of time to run some long experiments. If, like our core entrepreneurs, can we say core entrepreneurs, or is that too cheesy? Our core, oh, there's a little bit of a nod there. Our core entrepreneurs, if they're get someone mean like me who's saying they've only got 2 weeks to run something in, they need to think about what they can do in that very short amount of time to get evidence within that period of time. And when you start looking at it that way, you'll find you can run experiments really, really quickly that still deliver you evidence at an affordable price. We looked at defining the metrics and variables for our hypothesis and deciding what we would do with the learning. And we decided we would do that before we actually start the experiment. What does good look like? What are the numbers that would be good? And if we get a yes for our hypothesis out of the experiment, what are we going to do next? And if we get a no, what are we going to do then as well? And we want to get that down in writing before we start running our experiments, because our brains are evil things. They cheat us. They lead us on wild, random goose chases. They will confirmation bias. If anyone's familiar with confirmation bias, they will convince you that, well, yeah, the experiment didn't quite give us the result we want, but we know that really it's right, so it's okay to carry on. We're writing this stuff down to take that ambiguity out of it and to stop our brains messing with us and leading us astray. We are running experiments and getting data, and then the data are what we use to drive our decisions. It doesn't matter how much passion we've got for an idea. It doesn't matter how much we believe in an idea. If the data say it is nonsense, then it is nonsense, and we pivot and we move on and we use your time in a more effective way because your time is valuable. After we've done our design phase, we moved into run. We actually look at performing the experiment, and then we're into analyzing the results and making decisions. Now, just on analyzing results, I want to talk about this one really quickly because I've read a book since we last met. Who's familiar with MVPs, the idea of a minimum viable product? So this is a lot of money. This comes from product management, very big on minimum viable products. And it's a word that it's a phrase that's come in for an awful lot of debate over the last few years, because what often happens in large organizations, especially where they've come from a traditional model of running projects with a start, middle, end, and a long lead time, as they tend to call them waterfall projects. What often happens with those is they'll be running this project and they'll be kind of looking like they're on time to deliver. And then suddenly, and because I work in PMOs that oversee projects in organizations, the sort of governance and oversight on a lot of them, you'll kind of look away, you'll look back, and suddenly you'll hear the language has shifted. And they'll be saying, well, actually, really what we're delivering is more of an MVP. We might be delivering another phase of this. And I'll sit there and go, hang on a minute. I'm sure we weren't talking about an MVP previously. What's happened here? And what's often happened there is actually they've been running out of time. They've squeezed what they're doing to meet the timescales. And it's not really an MVP in the way that the people that wrote, that coined that phrase originally intended it. What they've done is just squeezed something to fit in. So it's not a minimum viable product. It's more, it's the thing we could get out of the door within the time that we had. And because of that abuse of the term, it's led a lot of people to think about what they really mean by MVP. This is a quote from a book called Escaping the Build Trap. It's very, very software focused. If you're doing software, if your business is very much based on building out software, this might interest you. Everyone else is probably a bit too software for you, but this little quote was the one that interested me, from Melissa Perry. She said, the most important piece of the MVP is the learning, which is why my definition has always been the minimum amount of effort to learn, because this keeps us anchored on outcomes rather than outputs. Now, I like this, because what we should be thinking about is not so much what the smallest product is we can get out there, but what we should be thinking about is what's the minimum amount we can do to actually learn something. Now, my only criticism of this is that this might be good for people where learning is the goal. And I know several people who've connected into this are from a university background, might have done a master's, might have done a big thesis, might have done a PhD, and are now looking to commercialize on those things. You might look at this phrase and think it's okay. Well, bad news for you people. You are not in the world of academia anymore. You are now in the world of entrepreneurship. Learning is not the outcome here. A decision is the outcome here. Okay, there is value in the learning only when it leads you to a decision. The crucial part of us doing experiments is to drive a business decision, decide what you are doing and move on. So that's the only tweak I would make to this one here. And actually, there has been a lot of conversation about actually getting rid of the term MVP entirely, and then using the idea of RATs, which are the riskiest assumption tests, which actually is kind of what we're doing. So I like the way that product management is sort of almost coming into this world that we're thinking about here as well, where we're saying rather than doing an MVP, let's focus on our RATs, or our riskiest assumption tests that we can do. So a slight little tangent there. Apologies for that. Bringing it back in again to our next step here. That was analyzing our results. But crucially, we're analyzing those and learning. And we're doing that because we want to get to this step here, which is a data-driven decision. We've got the data from our experiments, and we're using that to make a decision on what we do next. And we're going to do one of three things at this point. We're going to persevere. So we're happy with the outcomes that we've got. We're in the right direction. We're either going to do another experiment that makes it, that gives us a greater level of detail, or maybe we're going to move to our next riskiest hypothesis and work on that one, or we're going to pivot. It didn't work. We're going to go back to our canvas and decide what we're going to do instead. Or we're going to say, actually, the results weren't clear enough for us. We're going to do another business experiment. It's still the important hypothesis, but we're going to try and either rerun that experiment in a different way, or try a different experiment to get the outputs that we need. And then we talked about going on to next steps. And when we met last time, we started looking at this idea of it being a continuous loop of having a hypothesis, experiments, decisions, and getting into a continuous cycle of hypotheses and experiments going forwards. Right, all good. I saw some nodding there, which was good. Some of you remembering that one. Some of you looking like you've seen that for the first time, which is a little bit concerning. I worry how much focus there was last time. But what I'd like to do now is dive in and hear from some of our entrepreneurs who hopefully have run some experiments and would like to tell us their stories. So let me just stop sharing screen for a second. Do I have any volunteers? And I'd say to people, I don't just want to hear about the successful ones that have proved you were right all along and are moving you forwards. I want to hear about the failures as well. So successful experiments that have failed. I'm also interested in the process of this. So if you have started an experiment but not quite completed it yet, I'm interested in how you found that process so far, what you're already figuring out from trying it. Ooh, do I need to pick on people? Oh, there's a hand up there. So, Yamama, hey, how you doing?
Hi, thank you. Well, it was not a full experiment because it was not, I planned it, but it wasn't not in the right direction that I want because of the time. But what I wanted to check is the rewarding. So Mawsu'a, we offer a rewarding system for content writers. So I wanted to check how can we phrase the reward to content writers. Will be would they expect or accept the digital currency as a reward system, or they will be afraid and so on. So because this was our assumption that everyone will take the reward.
Yeah, I remember this one. So as a content platform, you were looking at how you could reward people for contributing content. And because you're looking across different markets and different countries for this, there was a question there that if we're rewarding people with a kind of digital reward scheme, does that work in all of the markets that we're looking at? Would that resonate with people? Would that encourage people to add content?
Exactly.
That was the hypothesis.
Exactly. Yes. So what we found is we didn't get like a clear answer on that on that question, but it made me think that I should be ready for our alternative rewarding system, because anyway, both ways, we tell the writers that we will not be able to reward you with digital currency in phase one. So once you say that, they start thinking about, okay, so what are you going to provide me? And they start focusing on that, and they see the value of it. Oh, you are going to give me a video, you're going to give me a reach, you will turn my articles into audio. So I think that led me to another assumption, that I was scared that some writers will not see the value of the content of the rewarding system if it was not a digital currency. But I think that from the interviews we did, I think they will accept not having a digital currency at the beginning, but they need to have this clear plan. So I'm not sure if it was like a successful experiment, but this is what I got out of it.
Okay, so you were doing stakeholder interviews. What was the experiment you were running by the sounds of it? There was the assumption around digital currency there, and we're this is very much in the sort of early phase. We've gone quite wide with the reason we like those types of experiments is because they're quick to get going. They are cheap to do. The downside, the evidence isn't the strongest evidence in the world, because we often find with these type of interview type experiments, we can get people saying, yes, I'd like that. And then later on, when we actually try and get them to part with money, in some cases, words and content, in your case, that's suddenly when they kind of flake out and question it. But we like them up front because they're very quick to run and very cheap to run, and they validate our general direction. And then once we've gone past that general direction, we can then do more expensive tests that give us high levels of evidence later on, which is perfect. And you've had that conversation. It sounds like what you're saying is, though, by having those stakeholder interviews, the assumption that you had whilst you were going in saying, would they be okay with it being a digital reward, it's led you even wider than that to say, actually, maybe it doesn't need to have a reward in that sense at all, because what we're hearing from our stakeholders is actually the fact that they will get their content published on a number of different mediums and out there for people to see is almost a reward enough in itself for some of our writers, and maybe that will be good enough for phase one for us. Did I play that back correctly?
Yes, totally. Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
How does that, what does that mean in terms of your next steps? Does this get you to market faster, or what does this mean for you now?
Well, this I should work on a clear rewards for phase one. I need to figure out like exactly which writer will get, like, because we said we will not do, for example, audio content for everyone. So I need to put down exact criteria for the rewarding, and then I should start planning like a marketing strategy where I need to put out my messages clearly about the rewarding system. So this is my next step.
Fantastic. So thinking about our world of running experiments continuously, we would then go to a next level of sort of granularity. So you're right. So writing that writing your marketing strategy to attract people who are creating content for you, writing that content down, and then looking to have maybe a landing page or some kind of a sign up thing where you're getting people to say, okay, this is where we want you to sign up. and then actually testing how many people not just say yes, that will be fine in an interview to you, but how many are actually going to click that button and commit to something. So that will be the next step. That will take you more effort because you're writing content now, you're writing copy, you're having to put it on a page, you need whoever your web person is to put a button on there for you that you can count and keep that data somewhere. That is a more expensive experiment to run. But we know we're in the right direction. So this is now about taking it down to the next level of granularity. Sounds good. Fantastic.
Sorry, one question about the content.
Yeah, go for it.
You just said, so do you think, or do you believe that I should also do experiments on the content styles, like A/B testing, we call it in marketing, on the content itself, the marketing messages?
Yes. And it depends. We'll talk a bit about prioritization a bit later on in this, but I will come back to you then and ask you what you think based on what we do then. Should we do more experiments? My answer is always yes, but you need to balance that with how you prioritize and make sure you're focused on the most important ones for you, okay? So for some things like that, you might decide, I'd like to do A/B testing, but I also want to test this thing out. That one's slightly more important with the capacity I have, so I'm going to do that one first. So that will be the balance on that one. Who else have we got? Who else wants to share for me? Who thought this was a good idea and it all just fell flat on its face and you've been really, really busy? You wanted to do an experiment. You promised yourself after we last met you would do it and life has just taken over. Anyone like that on here? Anyone brave enough to tell me, yeah, that was me? Okay, I don't see any hands up. Sarah, are you there? Do you want to tell us how you've got on? And Omar, I'm coming to you next, just to warn you.
Yes, John. Actually, yes, we can consider our platform until now, it's under MVP model, as we are still not invest in large marketing campaigns. So yes, our platform in general, our website application, it's still under testing.
And since the last meeting, what experiments have you tried to run over the last couple of weeks, if any?
Actually, we are still our experiments. It's regarding features now.
Is there one of those in particular you want to tell us about?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right.
We are still working, actually.
No problem. I won't put you on the spot anymore then. Thank you. Omar, have you got anything to share with us? I'm guessing it looks like Omar's mute button might be stuck. Okay, I'm gonna stop being mean to people and picking on people now. What I would say to take away from this is experimentation requires it sounds easy. It's hard because you need to put the thinking time in up front and you need to carve out time to do it. And time goes by really, really fast. I guarantee out of our entrepreneur group here, there are loads of people that after the last session were fired up, thought, yeah, I can get an experiment done, no problem. I'll start that next week. And then I'll start it on Wednesday. I'll start it on Thursday. And then this morning I've gone, oh, whoa. Where did that time go? It goes really, really fast, right? And we need bear that in mind. And I encourage you all after this session to really think about that very first step and then actually take that first step then, okay, to start these experiments off and validate where you're going as soon as you can. Because the moment you leave it an hour turns into a day turns into a week, and by then you've kind of lost the flow of it, okay? Right, let me dive in. So we know we've got a sense now of how hard it is to start our first experiment, yeah? Let's just share screen a little bit because the these guys here, booking.com, they are big on experiments. I'm going to share a link for you that you can read at your leisure. I'm sharing that in the Zoom group here for people on LinkedIn or Facebook. I'm not sure whether you see those or not, but basically, if you Google Harvard Business Review experiments booking.com, you will find the article that I'm talking about really quickly. So what booking.com do? They're running about 1,000 experiments simultaneously, and these are structured experiments. These are ones that people have put into a system. They've logged the experiment internally, they've recorded what outcomes they're expecting and what they'll do off the back of those, and working out about 25,000 tests a year. And this was from an article that research at Harvard Business Review did just before the year 2000, so it's safe to assume that's probably grown even sort of beyond that now. And they have a culture internally where they delegate responsibility. They say anyone in the organization can run experiments without manager approval to enable that experiment making, but they do require people to document those experiments and record them so everyone can see what they're doing. So we've gone from just this idea of running one small experiment now as a startup to actually running tons of these experiments simultaneously. Let me just share that link in the group for you now, so you can read that one at your leisure and just get a sense of how the big boys do it. There we go. That should be in chat for those of you that are in the Zoom room now. But the reason I'm showing you that is because whilst we're looking at this as entrepreneurs and how we do it, this is something that is not just for entrepreneurs, and this is what the big companies do as well to succeed. And whilst booking.com is an online company, it's not all about software companies as well. FedEx and companies like that really take time to invest in this experimentation approach in their businesses as well. So it's not just online. If you're running a business that isn't online, if it's on the land, if it's underwater, as I recall one of us is doing, then these processes are still absolutely applicable to you as well. Right. So we've gone through the experiment model quickly. Recap that from last time. We've looked at real world, and thank you again for the showing that we did have there. And I hope those of you that are just listening in have probably just got a sense there of how it sounds simple, but it actually really is quite hard to get going with some of this stuff. What I would like to do is talk then about the mindset that we're looking for, and then we're going to go on to some of the techniques that you can apply that will help you actually get yourself into the routine of running regular experiments and holding yourself to account on those. So here we go. Let's dive in. Mindset. So mindsets. What is a mindset? Mindset is a set of beliefs or a way of thinking that determines behavior, outlook, and mental attitude. And I think most people here have probably got a kind of an entrepreneurial mindset, and we tend to categorize the entrepreneurial mindset as someone that would naturally pursue opportunities, likes innovation, likes leveraging the resources they have around them and maximizing those, and is someone who likes mitigating risk. This is what we normally think about when we think about the entrepreneur mindset. What we're talking about with our rapid experimentation is a slightly different view on that. And what we're thinking about here is these kind of things as well. So you've probably got the entrepreneur mindset already, but we're looking at these kind of things as well and see if these resonate with you. So that first one there, strong opinions weakly held. Now this comes from an article by Paul Sappho from Stanford University. It got popular a few years back, mainly because it's a really simple idea and everybody gets it. Have strong opinions, but hold them weakly. This ties in really neatly with what we're talking about with experiments. Your business idea is something that you have a strong opinion about. You have a strong opinion about what you want to do. You've probably got a strong opinion about how you're going to do it, and those things are great. However, if we're going to be experimenting, we need to be prepared for our experiments to tell us actually we're going in the wrong direction because the data don't back up what we're saying. So strong opinions weakly held. Be prepared to change, be prepared to pivot, be prepared to adjust if the data don't support the strong opinion that we've got. Ties in nicely with our next one there. Evidence trumps opinion. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. If the evidence tells you you're wrong, then you're wrong. Equally, if you've run an experiment, if you're working with a wider team, if you've agreed to do, if you're doing an experiment in your team that somebody else has devised and you don't think it's the right thing, again, look at the data and see what the data are telling you. If you're in this rapid experiment mindset, then you will go with the data every time. There's this idea of always learning and always observing. And whilst I was maybe a little bit critical of those of you that might have come from a purely academic background and not getting to decisions fast enough, this is where you guys really do shine, okay? It's that always learning kind of mindset with it. What can we learn? What can we learn? What can we observe? What can we explore? What can we understand that comes with the experimentation? And another part that's crucial, some of you are running a business by yourself. You're an entrepreneurial company of one, which can be very lonely. Others of you will be working with a small team. And if you're working with a team, then this experimentation is something that you need to proliferate and share with others. So you need to empower and coach the others around you to adopt this mindset and conduct their own experiments as well. This is kind of what we're looking at. When I'm talking about an experiment, a rapid experiment mindset, these are the kind of things that we're thinking about, and this is what we're looking for. Let's take a look at how we visualize this then. So we talked, when I met with the entrepreneurs in the deep dive session, we talked about the process of experimentation. We spent quite a lot of time on what types of experiments there were and how to select the best experiment for the job. What I'd like to do now is try and look at what the process looks like and how we build that into a flow. And I apologize for my tardy drawing. If you look close to this, I'm wincing at this because there's a little bit there that doesn't quite neatly join up, and a little bit there that I'm already twitching at this. Maybe I need to go back and readjust this diagram a bit later on because it's not quite right, but it's probably good enough for what we need today. So let's just whiz through this. We've got our business assumptions here at the top left. And from our business assumptions, we're in this designing phase here where we're creating hypotheses off the back of these. We're then doing this prioritization that we talked about here, prioritizing our hypotheses. Of this, we're selecting experiments that we want to run. We're defining the variables for them and what we're going to do if we're right and what we're going to do if we're wrong. Yeah? All with me so far? Right. We've probably got more than one business assumption. Therefore, we've probably got more than one hypothesis. Note the plural there, hypotheses, not is. So we've got multiple hypotheses that we've got prioritized, because chances are we're not going to be running just one experiment. Chances are you're going to be running several experiments at once. If you look at booking.com, I said 1,000 experiments simultaneously. You're probably not going to be doing that, but you will be running multiple experiments simultaneously. And very quickly, even when there's just one of you or two or three of you, that can get quite hard to track. So what we're doing is running those through an agile process using what we call a Kanban board here to keep track of everything that we're doing. So once we've got our hypotheses and once we've selected our experiments and defined those here, what we're going to do is start thinking about iterations. Now, I'm going to talk about 2 weeks here a lot because 2 weeks is what I've kind of landed on as a nice time for an iteration. I found that whatever I'm trying to do, a week is generally too short to get something done. 4 weeks, you kind of lose focus and then try and rush it all at the end. And I found 2 weeks feels like about a right time for me to focus on things. You might find your iteration time is slightly different. Maybe you're happier with a shorter time. Maybe you need something slightly longer. That's on you. But I tend to find 2 weeks. I would suggest when you're thinking about your iterations, try 2 weeks. And if that isn't working for you, then maybe go wider or shorter from there. But what we're looking at doing is working out what we can do in that 2 week period. And we've broken this down into having a backlog of all the experiments that we want to run during that 2 week period. And we're creating a board with some simple columns here. So a backlog of the stuff we want to do, things that are in the setup phase, so experiments we're getting ready to run, experiments we're actually running, and the experiments that we're learning from here. This is how we're building our board out. And maybe at the beginning of our iteration, beginning of our week, we might be saying, okay, what I'm aiming to do by the end of this is I'd like to get maybe 3 of these across into learning, and one of those will still be running, because we'll have just set it up. Maybe that's the kind of conversation you're having with yourself. So you're hypothesizing here what you want to get to by the end of the cycle. Now, the reason I've got 2 boards here is purely because this was a really bad way of me trying to describe this running over 2 weeks. So we've got our board, and basically we're then dragging these across our board one at a time. So we're taking from our backlog, we're taking our most important hypothesis, and we're moving this into setup. Once we've got it in setup, we're looking at what we need to do to set this experiment up before we run it. We talked about, using your mama's example there, we're going out and doing an interview. Great. Well, if we're doing an interview, we need to think about the questions we're going to ask. Crucially, we need some actual real people to interview. And then we need to set up appointments with them. These are the things that take us time to do, right? So we're going into the setup phase. We need to think about what that looks like, pulling our script together, and then we're actually sorry, somebody appeared behind me, pulling that script together, and then we're going out, getting those appointments in the diary and getting those set up. So we've got this one in setup phase here. Once we've set it up, we're moving across to run. Maybe we've pulled another couple of experiments through, and we're starting on these ones. And as we go through, things are moving across the board and getting to this learn stage where we've actually completed the experiment and we're learning from them. This is kind of how the process works. And we like to have these boards super visible and super transparent to people in your little entrepreneurial organization. And I would also say, consider who you're going to share these with as well, because what these boards do, by having this transparency, you create accountability. If you put on a board all the stuff that you want to get done, and you're putting at the top, this is where we hope to be by the end of the week, or by the end of the 2 weeks, you're showing everyone that and making it visible, and you kind of feel obliged to do it. And you kind of feel that external pressure to do it. If you're sharing this with somebody investing in your organization, then they will be coming back to you going, oh, how are you doing with that? You said you were going to do it. Let me see the board, see how you're doing. If you've not got those people around, if you really are genuinely starting your business up in a corner of your bedroom upstairs in your house, share your board with your family. Put it visually on the bedroom door and say, look, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm doing. This is how things are moving. And they will ask you questions about it. And as they're asking you questions, you can look at how those cards are moving across your board, and you can have those conversations, and you're creating that environment where you're making it visible, you're talking about it, and you're holding yourself to account by doing it as well. Depending on how you're set up, the best way to do this, I find, if you are co-located with people, is to always have a physical board with post-it notes, or sticky notes, because it's something tangible and you can play with it. And everybody likes playing with things. If you can walk up to a board and draw on it and poke it and move cards around and question things, it becomes something that is really, really interactive. However, if you are working remotely from people, tools like Trello are absolutely perfect for this. There's not only Trello, there's tons of tools that do this stuff, but Trello is simple and it's free, and it's one that I use regularly. So if you've not got any tools in mind, have a try of Trello for this one, where you can create these cards simply and move them across your boards. So this is how we're looking at setting up our experimentation. You might decide to break this down into more steps, which is perfectly okay to do. You might decide to break down the individual tasks that you need to do to set something up. Maybe you'd have a card for each of those that you want to move across the board. If you want to go down to that level of granularity, that's perfectly fine. I would say start at this level, see how this works for you, and then adjust your boards to your way of working and your comfort levels. But we're running this through an iteration. We're planning what we're doing. We're running our first week, running our second week. It's the same board. My visual there isn't great. Don't assume you need 2 boards for 2 weeks. You don't. You're running through the same board. And after the end of that week, we are doing some learning. What have we learned from this? And out of that are decisions and the things that haven't quite got through our board yet, either because we planned that they would have only got to set up for a longer experiment, for example, or things that we thought would finish but haven't quite finished yet, we're going back up into our planning cycle. We're adding new things in, new experiments coming in all the time, and we're continuing the loop. So this is how we are starting to move from coming up with one experiment idea for taking our business canvas, bringing one idea through, converting that to hypothesis, running experiment, to actually moving to this way of working where experimentation is something you are doing continuously. And every couple of weeks, you're getting yourself into a disciplined process of saying, right, okay, what's next? Let me look at what's coming through from my assumptions, what my next biggest priorities are, what I've already got on my board that I need to get finished, and what I therefore think I can do experiment-wise in the next 2 weeks. And we roll and we roll and we roll. All good with that one? People I can see, thumbs, nods, shakes. Magic, thank you so much. Good, 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 good. Right, so this is what we're doing. So this type of board here is what we call a Kanban board. Some of you may be familiar with these. If so, great. Those of you that haven't, these are, again, used in big organizations. This is not a thing that I'm telling you to do because you're a startup. This is what we use in big organizations as well. A couple of these are photos of real ones that I've worked with in large companies. Some of these are more online sort of equivalents of them to help people understand them. That one, top right-hand side there, if you've not used Trello before, that's what it kind of looks like in Trello on the top right-hand side there. So a mixture of physical boards and software-based boards there. But there's a few things that I'd like to just go through you with these boards. So if you're creating all of your experiments that you want to run and you're pulling these across a board here, these are the 3 things that I'd like you to please to bear in mind. You might give me 1 second, I'll come to you in just a second. Okay, let me just get through these 3. So first thing is this: limit your work in progress. Now, if any of you come from a finance background, you'll be familiar with work in progress from a financial context, which is fine. But it also works for us in this context as well. Basically, until things are done, until your experiment is complete, it doesn't have value. Your experiment is only valuable when you've done it and you've derived learning from it. Up until then, it doesn't have value. It is taking up cycle time in your head. It is taking up people's time. It's taking up your customers' time as well. And it doesn't have value until it is done. Therefore, you don't want to have too many things in this work in progress category because they're all costing you money and time and effort, and they don't have value yet. So limit the amount of things that you have going on at once. It is far better to get one experiment done in 2 weeks, done, learning, understood, and decision-based and decision made, than it is to get 5 experiments started. Okay, so always look at limiting your work in progress. Try and squeeze down. If you've got too many things in run, don't start another one. Squeeze it down, get those things done. And to do that, we always look at the boards that we've got and we read them right to left. So the things that you've got, if I look at this one here, this one is more of a software one, in progress, in peer review, in test, and then done in this example. We would always look at, when we look at the board, we look at the thing that's in test and ask ourselves how quickly we can get that to done before we look anywhere else. Then in peer review, how do we get these into test? Then in progress, how do we get those into peer review? But we do it right to left because the priority is always getting something to done, always this way first. I always say that because if we don't think about it that way around, what tends to happen is we naturally start reading left. Or certainly in Europe, we tend to read left to right. And we're then saying, right, okay, let me start with what I've got here in my backlog. How can I start this thing? Which brings us to this point at the end here, right? Stop starting things and start finishing things. The priority is always getting something to done. We value that far more than starting something. Okay. Now there was a hand up. Did I answer that, or do we want to ask a question? If you do, just come off mute and shout at me.
No, my question was like how to prioritize your hypotheses and experiments.
I'm getting to it. I promise. I do have slides on that one. I haven't forgotten that one. I will come to that one, absolutely. I mean, we did have the thing that we talked about last time with the matrix there, but I'll go through a few more scenarios for you as well. So this is how we're using our board. So I would encourage you all to create yourself a board, either something physically, which is the preference if you've got people around you. And you can just use a wall with some tape and some post-it notes. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. If you're all remote, then try and do something online, a Trello board or whatever other software you're using. You'll find a lot of these software tools have the ability to create these kind of Kanban boards in them now as well. But if you create this, you make the work that you're doing visible, you make the experiments that you're doing visible. And if it's visible, you're creating that accountability for yourself, either just with yourself, which is still powerful in its own right, or with the people around you that you're working with, or your family members, or anybody else around you that can get to join in to help you hold yourself to account and keep you moving forwards. I'm moving on not to prioritize. I'll just reassure you, prioritization is down there. I won't forget about it. But there was a couple of bits in that diagram that I showed you that I kind of glossed over. And it was, well, we talked about the iteration planning, but there was this one here, this idea of a retrospective meeting. Retrospective meaning looking back. And I just want to move on to that one for the moment, because it's a really, really important part of this cycle. Now, some of you may be familiar with the double diamond process for innovation. We're using that for learning and retrospective as well. And this is how we run these retrospectives. We do it in two parts. The first part is the problem or opportunity space. So what problems have we had? What have we found out? What was good? What's bad? This is kind of what we're looking at in this space. And then we're moving on from that mindset to a solution mindset where we're looking at what we're doing with what we've learned. So in that first one there, what we're doing is gathering data. So we've run our iteration. We've run for a week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever you've decided your iteration is. We've gone through a number of experiments during that time. Now we've forced ourselves to a time box. So we're stopping at the end of that time box and reflecting and running this retrospective process for ourselves. And what we'd like to look at here is the data that we've got. So your data will be how many experiments have I moved across the board? Where are they all sitting now? That's a source of data for you. You've got the data that you've got from the experiments themselves. What insight do I have from the experiments? You've also got the data that you have, which is the learning along the way, right? So if you created that hypothesis for yourself that you were going to get 5 experiments done in 2 weeks and one of the longer ones started, was that right or was that wrong? If it was wrong, what changed from the assumption that you'd made? Did it take longer than expected because of distractions? Did it take longer than expected because actually you just misjudged how long it takes to write a survey, for example? Did it take longer because finding people to actually interview takes longer than we think? All of these things are data points that you can gather and put into your retrospective process. And we're deliberately going very, very wide on these things. What are all these things? Get as much of that data in as you can. And we're using that to generate insight. We've got the data there and we're understanding what we can derive from it. I was going to do 10 experiments and I've actually started one and not finished it. That's data. What insight am I deriving from that? Well, actually, I was massively optimistic and overconfident in how much time I could spend on things. And it was completely unreal. That was a normal period. That was what a normal week looks like for me. And I realize now that was over optimistic for me. Or it could be the other end. It could be actually, I've realized now looking back, I did 10 or 20 other things that now on reflection maybe weren't the most important things and maybe I wasn't focused on the right things. Or it may be that actually, where I thought it would only take me a couple of hours to think about who I was going to send a SurveyMonkey survey to, I actually found it's really, really difficult to find all those email addresses and pull them together. So those kind of bits of data are the things that we're trying to gather together and actually generate insight from. And once we've generated that insight, we're then looking at prioritizing. And this is where the diamond is kind of coming in, right? We're saying, okay, so we've got all these bits of insight. Which of those are the ones that we really, really want to address? if you thought you might do 10 experiments and you can only actually do one, then that sounds like quite a high priority one that you might need to be addressing. Yeah. So we're looking at which ones of those are the most important ones to get done. If it's just you, you're deciding that. If you work in a small team, get the team to agree on which ones of those are the ones that they want to prioritize. And remember, because this is an iterative process, you're doing this again in 2 weeks' time. So this is not the end of things. We're looking at what we're prioritizing for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll look again and again and again. Once we've got those things that we want to prioritize, we're then going into our second part of the diamond, which is looking at options and then looking at what our next steps are. Now, too often people talk about learning lessons. They learn the lessons and then stop. We need to do this second bit and generate next steps, because if we don't generate some next steps, we're just generating learning. We're filing away somewhere. And guess what? Your next 2 weeks is going to be the same as the last 2 weeks because we've not done anything differently. This is where we're exploring options. What is it we want to do differently this time round? Do we want to do, what is it we're doing differently? Do we want to change our iteration to be a longer iteration, for example? Do we want to actually just commit to ourselves individually that we're going to put more time aside for this? Do we want to firm that up with ourselves and actually book meetings in our diary to block time out so no one distracts us? Do we want to do some different experiments because the ones that we didn't generate the results quality data that allows us to make a decision? Do we want to go back and pivot on things? We're looking at those options and then we're deciding what those next steps are, which is where we're coming down again. Someone's asked there, is this for R&D? I would say you are doing this as part of R&D, but what we're talking about here is your business as a whole. If you are building your entrepreneurial business out, we're talking about testing your business assumptions, not just features and functionality of a product, but actually the wider everything that your business is based on. Is the supply chain valid? Is my investment model valid? Is my cash flow model valid? Is my assumption about the people out there in the world actually really wanting this solution to the problem that I believe they have valid? So yes, R&D, but you're looking across your whole business canvas, not just on feature experimentation here, Gassan, to answer the question that you put in chat there as well. And this retrospective process is something that we run through for two different things. One is, of course, the experiments that we've run. We've run an experiment. We've got it through our board, from from defining it to setting it up to running it. We've got it to that learning phase where we're learning from the experiment that we've run. So, of course, we're then going to look at that data, generate insight. Off the back of that, we're going to decide what we need to do with that data and what our next steps are. Are we going to persevere? Are we going to pivot? Are we going to do another experiment? But it's not just about that, because what I would like you to be doing as well is looking at the process that we're going through. So where we've talked here about running this process, oh, my cards are moving backwards. That's never a good sign. There we go. Cards always move forwards. There we go. Thank you. So where we've talked about running this process, the first time you run this for yourselves, you might want to do that retrospective almost in two parts. One, what's the learning from the experiments? Two, what have I learned from the process? Was 2 weeks right for me, or was that too short? Or could I bring it down to maybe a week? So you're looking at those kind of things. What was the process the right length? Do I have the right columns on my board, or did I then get frustrated that I couldn't move things across and I'd like more granularity on my board? Great, add some more columns in, see if that works for you, see if that's better. Do I need to run smaller? Do I need to break things down more so I can see more progress? Great, then that's the thing you want to do with it. Do I want to bring more people into the planning sessions that I have to talk about what we're doing, because then everyone buys into what we're doing, and I've got the whole, if I'm working with a small team, the whole team are moving forwards together, then you might want to do that. Whatever it is we're learning about the process, you're feeding that back in as well. So we're following exactly the same process of learning for the experiments that we're doing, and also for the process that we're following as well. Is that making sense? Is that resonating? Fantastic. So we're going through this process of experimentation, and every time we go through an iteration, we're looking at the learning we've got from our experiments and applying that to our business. And then we're also learning from the process of the process, and we're applying that learning back to make the process more efficient as we go forwards. I think we've kind of gone through this one before, but just a reminder, certainly for those who are new on LinkedIn and Facebook, when we're talking about the experiment outcomes, we're doing one of three things. We're either persevering, which means we're either saying we're going to carry on with the same hypothesis, but a higher fidelity. So the next experiment wants to do more granular. Or we might be deciding that actually we have another big scary hypothesis that we want to move on to. We might be deciding to pivot completely, in which case we're reflecting on what we've learned from that. We're looking at the data, we're following the data. We're going back to our canvas and we're looking at, okay, right, we've learned this. How does this change our business canvas, and what new experiments does that mean we need to come up with? So what new assumptions we're making, what new hypothesis have we got, and therefore what new experiments do we need to do? Or our third one was actually the experiment didn't generate valuable enough data for us, so we want to adjust the experiment and continue testing. And I said this in the last week, but I'll remind you on here as well, what you shouldn't do if the evidence is unclear, don't give up on that hypothesis and move on to another one. Because that hypothesis was your most important hypothesis. It probably therefore still is your most important hypothesis, and you need to keep testing that one. Don't just give up on that one because it's too hard. Look at what different experiments you can do that give you meaningful data that allow you to move forward and make those decisions that you need to make. Okay, so on from our process and on from retrospectives to look at what we're doing next. Let's go on to now being your own venture capitalist. This is you guys. So this is where we're starting to move into the idea of deciding how we prioritize what we're working on. So at the beginning, we said that running experiments is a way to reduce risk in your business quickly by removing uncertainty. And it is. But also, so you might have new ideas coming in as well, which leads to this big question here, right? Which bets do you want to invest your time and your business money in? And you want to be doing lots of experiments at once. I'm not saying you need to be booking.com and be doing 1,000 simultaneously, because that's crazy, right? You're small. But if you only have 1 or 2 experiments running, chances are you'll find, and you'll find this as you go, you'll learn this as you run through this iterative process, you'll probably get a sense of how many of your experiments tend to succeed and how many fail. Or sorry, how many succeed or how many take you to a learning point where you are pivoting, because that's still a useful learning, right? And what you don't want to end up with is all your eggs in one basket. If you focus on one big, long experiment and it doesn't work out for you, then you're kind of almost back to the drawing board on something which is painful. So you want to be running a mix of things. If you're a venture capitalist, chances are you're not just working with one entrepreneur running their business, because a lot of new businesses fail. They're working with a broad group of entrepreneurs, because the ones that succeed are likely to win big, and they'll accept that some of those won't work out. They're taking those bets. It should be exactly the same with the experiments that you're running. So looking at what you want to experiment on and doing a lot of different experiments. So when you're doing those, you've got some wins, some that don't quite work out for you, and you're pivoting on those as well. All of which brings us to, you'll be glad to know, prioritization strategies. There we go. Okay, so let's look at this one, prioritization strategies. At the simplest level, it does come down to this 2x2 matrix. And I think somebody mentioned at the beginning that I've got an MBA. MBA students are always turning to 2x2 matrices. I don't know what it is with us, but we love a 2x2 matrix. We like trying to do this XY thing and putting everything into boxes. It's kind of what we do. It's an MBA thing. I don't know why, but we do. Anyway, but this is what we're looking at. So again, we're looking at our assumptions, and we're looking at which of those are the most important ones to our business. If this assumption turns out to be false, is it going to kill my entire business overnight? If it is, that one's going to be at the very, very top of your list there. Yeah, that's the stuff that you want to be focused on. And the other axis there is, do you have evidence to back you up? So if I decide that I want to start a new business here where I am in London, which is going to be I'm going to have inflatable kayaks, canoes, and I'm going to have a van. And my business model is this: I believe that actually I can take this. I can go to Westminster Bridge towards sort of the top end of London. I can inflate a whole load of these. I can charge a fixed price per family to hire one of these out, going down river with a stream. I can drive my van down to the end, scoop them all up again, deflate the boats, drive them back, and I can do the same thing again. And that feels like an okay business model to me, right? So fundamentally, to me, I've got my next business idea. I want to be looking at that and saying, well, actually, of course, crucially, I want to see if people are going to go. Crucially, are people actually going to be willing to do this for me? And actually, probably another very important one would be up there for me would be actually, can I legally do this? Are there rules around being on the river that I'm not aware of, maybe that would kill this one? Is there something that says you can't just throw families onto inflatable boats in the middle of a busy river in one of the biggest cities in the world? I don't know. So I've got some assumptions there that I kind of almost want to test out straight away. Now, here's an interesting one. Let's assume for that one a minute. Am I legally allowed to do this? I've done a bit of Google searching. And actually, it looks like I need a license to put a boat on a river, but it says as long as that boat is less than a year old, then they kind of get automatically licensed straight away. Okay. So I'm saying, okay, I've got some evidence that one's okay. It's still very important for me, but I'm saying I've got some evidence. So I'm moving it over here into the left-hand quadrant. I've got some more important ones that have no evidence at all, and these are the ones I'm doing first. That one's kind of over here to the left. So this is why what I've put down here is important. Your top right ones, these are your high-risk assumptions. These are the ones that you want to be testing first. But it doesn't mean you ignore the other three. This side here, these very, very important ones that you think you've got evidence for, make sure you are challenging that evidence as well. Does that evidence hold up? Does that make sense? Is it as robust as you think it is? Because the website I got that information on, it may turn out, for example, that it's only actually true of rigid boats, not inflatable boats. It may only be true of pleasure craft and not commercial craft. It may only be true if you're not renting them out. So there might be a whole lot of stuff, because I'm not an expert in this area. So I might be saying, I've got evidence of that one, it's good. But I'm constantly challenging myself and going, is that real? Do I need to actually run this past, I don't know, maybe an expert in this field? Possibly. And I'm challenging it, and making sure that the evidence I think I have really does stack up. So this is the most important way we prioritize. But there's a few other things that I'm going to give you as well that you would need to consider as you're prioritizing. So this one here, don't rush to the validation experiments. Discovery is where we're going wide. This is where we have an idea. We have very little evidence to back it up. Now, if we're in a situation where we have very little evidence to back our idea up, we don't want to invest a lot of time and money. We invest money in things where we've kind of gone past that stage. We've validated stuff already, and we want to get that higher fidelity. For those ones where we don't have any evidence, let's not throw a load of money at it, right? Let's look for the cheap, dirty experiments we can do. Let's go and do some customer interviews. Let's see if this stuff flies. Let's see if people want to be thrown onto a river. Let's speak to an expert in the field, and let's interview them and ask them if this is a go. Let's do those really, really quick, easy experiments first. Now, when I spoke to this group of entrepreneurs last time around, a lot of people were straight into experiments that were in this more detailed phase. Yeah, we're beyond that stuff. We've already built a prototype. We're straight into the next level of testing. Please, please, please don't rush it. These experiments, the experiments that you do in discovery, these very, very cheap ones, can bring you an amazing amount of insight very, very cheaply. Don't go straight to the more detailed, more expensive validation ones, no matter how tempting that may be for you. Always try and do the cheap. If you're going to fail at something, fail cheaply. Yeah, so try and do the discovery experiments first and then your validation ones. So just asking a question, what's the difference between questionnaires and interviews? What's the difference between the questionnaires and interviews we do before building the MVP and the ones we do after an MVP? I'm guessing those are probably different assumptions that sorry, so
can I just maybe explain my question?
Go for it.
Yeah, so before we do the product or build the MVP, we usually do like focus groups on qualitative and quantitative questionnaires.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the information we collect, we validate that we have a problem, and that's why we built our product based on that validation. But then we're saying that we need to do another round of testing and experiments after doing the MVP. So are we saying to ourselves that, yeah, the ones that I did before building was not true, and now I'm experimenting different things?
No,
it's confusing here for me, at least.
So the very first ones you did are cheap, yeah, because you've not had to build anything. So you're going out and surveying, you're getting some data back. The evidence strength of that data is not very strong because you've only had those conversations with people. Yes, you've tried to make it as qualitative and quantitative as you can, but it's no substitute for somebody actually sitting there with a real product and being asked to hand over cash for somebody, or asked to contribute words on your one there, are asked to commit to something. So the ones we're doing in validation are the ones where we're trying to get as close to somebody committing as we can. We're getting them to press a button and actually theoretically sign up for a pre-sale, or we're asking them to actually use the product day to day. So we're asking them to do those things there. To do that kind of stuff, we have to build a product, or certainly give the appearance of having a product. And even if you're doing a lot of stuff in this, be behind the scenes on it. So this is why we say, and of course, after you've run those, you want to get the insight from it. So you might well be doing questionnaires again afterwards, because that might be a way of getting information out of it. Or you might not be doing a questionnaire afterwards, because you might just be saying, if 1,000 people download my MVP app, or if I make this site live and 100 people contribute content in the first few weeks, then I've proved it. So you might not need to do surveys, because making it live or getting people to click is the experiment in its own right. But crucially, the experiments at the questionnaires at the beginning, we're doing questionnaires because they're cheap. We're doing interviews because they're cheap. And later on, you're then building an MVP, which is an experiment in its own right, because you've validated your direction in discovery, and then you're moving to validation. So the key thing I was trying to say was that don't rush to build your MVP product, which is typically going into validation world, because you can do an awful lot of stuff before you get to that point.
Yeah, makes sense. So do we consider like our KPIs, if we have them like in 2 weeks, can I use them for experiments? Like I want to get 10 users within 2 weeks. Can I consider that an experiment also?
Yeah. So what are you? Yeah. So what are you doing to try and get those 10 people in 2 weeks?
Like interview, one-to-one onboarding. What we're doing is one-to-one onboarding for phase 1. So maybe I should list down the names that I want to interview, and how I will make them like register within 2 weeks.
Okay. So your assumption is that the approach that your onboarding approach will be such that when you speak to 10 people, 100% of those people will have signed up on the platform and created something, or not created something, or just signed up on the platform within 2 weeks.
Yeah, like have them on board and without writing an article, just making sure that they are onboarded.
Cool. Okay, so that is your experiment. If 100% of those people sign up, and then you will have proved that test will have been completed successfully, and you're then going, right, okay, what do I need to do next? Well, my next level of granularity may be to say, you might be saying, does this work? Maybe that process you went through for those 10 was very, very manual and labor intensive. You want to try and scale that out. So maybe scaling out would be your next test. Or the other way around, maybe it would be something like, okay, how do we actually now see those people are really, I know they've signed up to the site, but are they actually willing to create content? Let's do an experiment that sees if they're willing to produce content.
So this is experiment 2.
Yes, exactly.
The following one. So,
yeah.
Sorry, last question.
Yeah.
Do we have like, what's the rate to say that like this is a successful experiment? Like, should it be always like, because you just said 100% they sign. So should it be always 100% success rate in order to consider that experiment as a successful one?
No, and I'm afraid I'm going to push the back and say that's very much on you guys for what you feel is right to give yourselves the right level of evidence within the time constraint you have and within the budget you have. You can always do massive, massive tests with thousands of people over many, many months with a multivariate messages with A/B testing and ABC testing, ABN testing. You can absolutely do those, but they cost a lot of money. The more scenarios you're adding, they cost money. The more people you're getting in, finding those people costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time to run. It takes a lot of time to analyze it. But you can do those experiments and set yourself up sort of bar of 80%. If 80% of this group sort of sign up, then we're good. But you may often find actually your reality is you only have the money that's in your pocket and a tissue and a sticky sweet, and that's it to work with. And you need to get some answers by next week, in which case you're probably going to say, I'm going to push with 5 people. And if 3 out of 5 of them say yes, that's good enough for me to say I'm moving on. Depends on the evidence strength you're looking for, the money you have and the time. Now, I'm going to move on because the next thing on here was about chaining experiments together. And this is an important concept for us because where we've talked about discovery to validation, this is where we have a journey of experimentation moving forwards. This here is an example that I've been through for a product that I created for my company. This was where we were looking at, as I think you know, I run, my company does specializes in the project management office space. The experiment, my hypothesis was that PMO managers would happily pay a third party, i.e. me, to do roll-up reporting for them for $100 a week. And roll-up reporting, just so you know, if you imagine you're in a big company for a second, you're running 20, 30 projects at once. Each of those project managers delivers a weekly report. And they'll say their project is red, amber, or green. They'll say where they are with their milestones, where they are with their risks. And somebody in the PMO team is then cutting and pasting that data and producing a kind of rolled up summary report for senior management. My assumption, the idea is my team could automate that process for them, take it off their core team, free up some of their analysts to do some actual analysis instead of doing cutting and pasting mundane, boring work. So that was what I had. So what I looked at doing, starting in this discovery phase here, firstly, expert stakeholder interviews. Interviewed some people who run PMOs, interviewed some independent contractors. This is what I'm thinking. How much time does this take? Is it a pain? Does it annoy people? Is this a problem that really needs solving? Was basically the aim of those stakeholder interviews. That was the experiment. I interviewed 9 people over a week on that one. And these are short Zoom call questions. Am I mad? This is what I'm thinking. I had real conversations rather than sending out a questionnaire, because there's power in a two-way conversation. You often get bits of insight that you hadn't thought of previously. One of the things that came out of that actually was, whilst it validated what I wanted to do and the direction felt right, what it also did give me a lot of stuff that then later went into some of the copy for it, because what they were saying was actually, if you've hired people to be PMO analysts and then they're doing a lot of cutting and pasting work, they get fed up pretty quickly. and they want to leave. So then a lot of the pitch for this became, actually, your people are more valuable than this. Why are they doing the mundane stuff? Let us do the boring stuff. Let your people do the high value work. And so it completely changed the pitch. It was originally about saving time. Suddenly it changed purely because of that experiment. But we didn't go live from there. We then looked at customer support analysis. So actually, in my case, that's, well, what are actually people asking us for? Yeah. So where we're speaking to our customers now, are they asking us for help with this? And we had those kind of conversations. And again, you can do this quite quickly, looking at your sales force, looking at the people who are working for you and with you. How many times have you actually been asked if you can do this and if you can make it go away for people? Moving on from there, brochure, landing page. I was looking around the desk to see if I had it to hold up for you. A really simple 3-part flyer leaflet that describes the process and how it works. I've not got the right one. This is kind of part of one of them there, I think. But I've got the weird background on. Hang on, let me just turn the weird background off for a second, just so we can video settings, so I can show you this without it disappearing. Video, background. None for a second. There we go. See my kids' toy in the background. Really, really simple one. This is the process. This is how it works. This is the QR code to click on to find out more about this service. And this was kind of part of a fold out thing that went out to people. And we also created, in parallel to that, we created a landing page to land on as well. So we've done the brochure and the landing page and pointed some traffic towards the landing page. We're moving away from people telling me in interviews they think it's a good idea, also to customer analysis saying a few people have asked for this, to actually saying, will people read the brochure and say, actually, I want this? Will they click on a landing page and express an interest on it? So we're taking it to that level. We're gradually building from people saying yes in discovery to getting closer to something here that is, will they really click on something? Now, importantly here, I've not got a process built. I've not actually, I know I need to automate the life out of this to make it work, but I've not built any of that automation. I've not built any of the standardization yet because I've not got a customer. I'm not going to build it until somebody is paying for it, which then leads me into this kind of pre-sale and Wizard of Oz phase projects, which is up in this validate. Now we're into validation, where we're now saying, okay, we've got this thing, we've got the landing page out there, people have expressed an interest in it, great. I'm after you signing up. If you sign up for 3 months, you only pay for 1. Now, for me, they're getting a good deal, so they want to sign up fast. For me, it's evidencing people genuinely are happy to part with money, because certainly because this is B2B, it's very easy to say, yes, that would be good. Yes, that would save me time. Oh, but it's not strong enough for me to ask my manager to approve the spend to do it. Okay, then it's not going to work. I'm asking them to part with money, because of all the experiments you do, the ones that are the most valuable are the ones where somebody actually hands you money for something. They're not just saying they're committed, they're really, really committed. And the last one here is a Wizard of Oz, where I'm going live with this thing. I've still not got the automated process there. It looks like, I don't know if anyone's read the Wizard of Oz, but the idea is you've got the Wizard of Oz, who's this kind of, there's this grand theatrical, mystical city of Oz, and he controls everything. And he's got a big booming voice and everyone's in awe of him. And actually behind the curtains is this tiny, shy man who's really, really nondescript. And this is the whole thing, right? You've got this nice veneer of product behind it. I've got a couple of my people actually really cutting and pasting this stuff in the background, which then gives me the time to actually build out the product. So this is how we chain experiments together on this journey, taking this from discovery through validation here. And this is another thing that we therefore need to bear in mind when we're prioritizing. We've got our assumption. We're testing that at this very early stage, but then we're deciding at each iteration, do we want to carry on with this one, further refining this one down to the point where we're good, or do we actually want to move on to another one? And those are the kind of decisions that we need to be thinking about while we're prioritizing. So it's not just our riskiest assumption first, but it's also about the how much of the chain do we want to get done to get this thing live, which is kind of about the level, which is kind of that x-axis of how much data do we have, because each of these is giving us more and more data, but probably slightly more nuanced because we're looking at chaining experiments together. And you might decide that you want to run a whole chain of experiments to keep that idea in somebody's head as you go through. There is a third thing I want to throw in around your prioritization strategies to give you another thing to think about. And this one is not mine. This is from McKinsey. And they've got a model called the 3 Horizons model. Now, their model is for big companies doing their strategic planning. And they basically have this model of you're looking at Horizon 1, the things you're doing for the next 1 to 3 years. Horizon 2, the things you want to explore and discover that you might be doing in the next 2 to 5 years. And then 5 to 12 years, entirely new possibilities and competencies. Now, because you're small startup entrepreneurial people, that timeline is massively compressed, right? You're not thinking about anything 5 to 12 years out. We're thinking about what we're doing tomorrow, what we might be doing in the next month, what we might be doing in 6 months' time. Maybe that's more your horizons. But the reason I want to talk about this with you is because this concept of different horizons is still quite valid to what you're doing. So when you're doing experiments, have a think about whether these are short-term, mid-term, or long-term. You might be deciding it is valid right now to be doing some where you've created some copy for your product. Maybe you might be deciding, well, actually, I want to do some testing where I'm going to produce one version of this that I'll give to one group of people, one version I'm going to give to another group, and see how many people sign up. Because if I get more signups with it worded this way, then that's the way I'm going to go. That's an entirely valid experiment to be good doing. There's clear value in it, and it's moving you forwards with your business. Great. But it's kind of short term because it's thinking about that thing you're doing right now in the moment this week. You've also got things that are more midterm or long term, things about scale or things like the next product that might be coming in. What the next, after you get this thing live, what's next and where does your business go next? Now, what you do with this will depend very much on your business, your model, the conversations you've had with your stakeholders, the people who are investing money in your business, and where you think you're going, right? But this is the other thing you need to consider with prioritization. How much of your experimentation time do you want to devote to the now? How much do you want to devote to what we're going to be working on next? So I've got, maybe you've got one, talking about people that are talking about features. Maybe you've got one feature now, but you want to bring another one in a couple of months' time. And maybe you've got an entirely new product that you're bringing in, maybe a year after that, for example. Then maybe you might be saying, I want to be splitting my time about a third for those. I want to spend a third of my effort each iteration looking at those short-term experiments I'm doing for the feature I'm working on now, the A/B testing around them and things like that. But I also want to make sure I'm spending a third of my time looking at the next feature that I know I'm doing in 6 months' time. These are going to be very, very discovery experiments at this stage, but I want to be spending a bit of time on those. And maybe I want to be spending the other, I may have got my thirds and 25% muddled up there, but you get the general idea. The other part of my time with some very, very wacky things that we might be wanting to do afterwards. So these are purely those very, very low cost experiments because we've not got much data there. We want to test a few things out that we might be wanting to do for the future. So this is another way you might be looking at how you prioritize. Firstly, we're looking at our x-axis. We're looking at our assumptions that we've made on our business model canvas. We're converting those into hypotheses. We're plotting those out to make our 2x2 matrix, and we're focusing on the stuff that is up in that top right-hand corner. That is our primary way of thinking. But we are also then over and above that. That's what I spoke about last time. It's the one I've kind of forced this time as well. I would also challenge you to make sure you're not rushing into validation, because the experiments you can do here are quicker and dirtier. And if you're going to fail cheaply. Then we've looked at chaining experiments. So we go from a very, very cheap experiment to a more granular one, to ones where we're actually getting money off people, or whatever your equivalent of getting money off people is at this stage here. And which then leads you to a question for your prioritization. Do I want to prioritize the next riskiest assumption, or do I want to focus on getting the assumption that I'm already working on further across so I can get this one thing live. And that's a trade-off that you'll have to make looking at the best data you have available to you at the time. But do consider not just the riskiest assumption, do consider whether you want to follow through on one chain before switching context to another one. And your final thing there is, how do you want to be splitting and allocating your time? Do you want to be throwing everything at once into this one thing that you're doing now, which is entirely legitimate and maybe right for you? Or do you want to be saying, actually, I want to spend half the time on the stuff we're doing now, and I want half of it focused on the stuff that we're going to be doing next, which is also entirely legitimate. This is not, the timings here are not, they work for big companies looking at their strategy, big stable companies working on strategies. These aren't your timings. These aren't your horizons. Yours will almost certainly be different. And if you then go and look at this 3 horizons model, you will find that a lot of people put ideas of percentages against these. Those are not your percentages. Yeah, you need to decide what's right for you. If running your small entrepreneur or startup, 100% of it is in the stuff that we're doing this week, that is a perfectly valid assumption to be making. But do make those assumptions on this kind of model first, and then look at what you're planning to put into your next iteration, because then you're questioning, right, am I doing the right thing? Am I balancing the work right to build my sustainable business that I want to be building for myself? Are we all good? Does that help on the prioritization side of things? Magic. Right. Experiments go wrong, because of course they go wrong, because everything goes wrong. Because if this was easy, somebody else would have already come up with your business idea and done it already. Of course things go wrong. We're taking risks. Now, for those of you who were here for the last session, you'll know this stuff already. So I'll whiz through these very quickly, and then we're going to go on to a few more. So things that go wrong: not committing enough time to experiments. Everyone who smiled and nodded at me 2.5 weeks ago and has now come back today and gone, uh-oh, actually, I haven't finished one yet. You know what I'm talking about here, right? Gold plating. Some of these experiments can be quick and dirty. Don't build an MVP first. Have interviews first. Create a mock landing page first and see if people click on it. Create an ad that points people to a landing page, and pay a few $100s for some Google ads targeting your group, and see if people actually click on the ad or sign up for an email about it. Those kind of things you can do before you ever build an MVP. You don't need to build a product. You need to assess your risky assumptions. And you can do that before you build a product. And you can get quite late in the day before you actually start building a product and save yourself a lot of money. Overthinking. Maybe some of you haven't started experiments yet because you're overthinking it. What is the right thing to do? How do I move forward? Stop overthinking. I remind you, last time we talked about Herb Hancock, the jazz musician. Put that first note down. If you haven't started experimenting yet, it's important to get into the rhythm and the routine of experimenting. Start something. Get an experiment done. Realize that it works for you. Great. And then you decide whether to carry on or do something or test something else. Or realize it didn't work, understand why it didn't work, and go on to, and then refine and learn from that. But you will never get anywhere if you sit there overthinking it. You need to force yourself to move forward. Now, where I've talked about time boxing for iterations, time boxing yourself is a really good strategy for this. The reason we're trying to push experiments and your iterative cycle into these kind of 2-week blocks is because you're forcing yourself to make decisions every 2 weeks. You might not have finished experiments, but you're forcing yourself to a decision point every 2 weeks and forcing yourself to learn every 2 weeks. For you individually, maybe you will set yourself some shorter ones. Have you ever heard of Pomodoro time? So this is a strategy for focused thinking. It's tomato time for those of you that speak Spanish, and it comes from literally the kitchen timers that are shaped like tomatoes. I don't know if anyone's seen those. You can twist them around and set a timer going. It was the idea of having one of those on your desk and setting yourself a short 30-minute, 40-minute timer going, right, okay, this is my deep focus time until the tomato runs out. I'm purely focused on this one thing. You're creating yourself a time box. So maybe if you don't know what your first experiment is going to be, set yourself a timer going and say, in 40 minutes time, I am going to have my first experiment defined. And give yourself that time box of forced iteration. And whatever you've got to by the end of that 40 minutes is good enough to get going with. Trust yourself, trust that's good enough and get going. Because if you don't start, you're definitely not going to get anything done. I'm going to push on a little bit before I come to questions on what goes wrong stuff. Incomparable or weak data. This is something you will learn over time. Get that first experiment done and you will learn why that experiment failed. This is why our retrospective process was not just about the learning we got out of the experiment, but also about the process that we're running. You will learn from the process that you're running and you will learn how to make your experiments tighter in the future and avoid getting in a situation where you've got through an experiment and found that actually the data's garbage. And not making decisions is the one that I feel I've talked about a lot already on this one, but there is nothing worse than getting learning out of experiments, but then not making a decision off the back of it. We are not in this for the academic rigor. We're in this because we are entrepreneurs, and therefore it is decisions that are valuable, not learning. That's what I talked through with the guys on the deep dive, but I've got a few more to add today. And they are these. Number one, not running enough experiments. This is not about running one experiment and then another one after the other. You need to be running these multiple experiments at once. Now, sometimes that's because you've got it takes a long time to set one up. It takes a long time to run one. So that might be a reason for doing it. Also, you may find actually you're working in different horizons. You may be looking at the product now and what the product looks like in the future. There are a number of reasons for doing it, but also go back to the point I made earlier, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So if you're running an experiment that's crucial to you and there's a high risk of it failing, which means you need to pivot, well, okay, what are my pivot options? If I think it's possible that I might be going down a pivot option, could I start an experiment now on one of those? Could I be testing 3 things at once, knowing that I'm only going to pick one of these, knowing that 2 of these aren't quite going to be the best ones for me, but at least I know I've got options to move forward with. It will speed you up massively if you can run multiple experiments at once, understand where the best path forward is, and then move forward with those quickly. Confirmation bias, I've touched on a bit as well. Your head is mean to you. Don't let your head be mean to you. So try writing your answers down up front, what you intend to do, what results you're expecting before the experiment, not after. The conversation we had earlier, is 100% the right metric for it? Is 100% of the people sign up the right metric, or should it be 3 out of 5? I don't know, because it's not my business, but you need to define that and write that down before the experiment. Because if you don't define it beforehand, I guarantee you that when you get to the end of the experiment, if it was something you really truly believed in, you will convince yourself that 1 out of 5 is a perfectly acceptable result, and therefore you're on the right track, and therefore you can go forwards. Whereas maybe before you started your experiment, you might have said, look, realistically, it would need to be at least 3 out of 5 or it's not worth doing. This is why we try and avoid it. And you lay these things out clearly to avoid yourself trying to convince yourself that your tests are giving you the backup, whatever you thought you were doing. And the last one there is believing you're done with the experimentation phase. So maybe you've started an experiment already, maybe you've done some experiments already, maybe some of you have listened to this and thought, well, yeah, he's talking about R&D, he's talking about the very early stuff. I've got a product already. I'm already live with my business. The stuff that John's talking about here is nice, but it's not for me. That's for the people that are really, really green to this. I'm beyond that stage. I refer you to booking.com. I refer you to so many big organizations that have experimentation at the heart of everything they're doing. The moment you stop experimenting is the moment your business is into decline. You need to be continuously experimenting, and the building blocks you put in place now, in terms of these rhythms and cycles that you put in place, are the ones that will help you scale your business and help you create a culture of experimentation and entrepreneurship with the people that you bring into your business and go on that journey with you. Was there a question? I see a hand. Go for it. Unmute.
It's me again.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. So my question was about the length of the experiment. So if, let's say we added, as you said, like the 2-week experiment length, and the experiment was not done within that time. So is it because it needs a lot of, because that task needed more time, or was it me too slow and I couldn't fit within the 2 weeks?
Yeah, so it's a difficult one. That comes down to deciding whether you are in an evidence unclear situation or whether you are in an evidence refutes hypothesis situation. And it can be hard to tell. Sometimes you are, two probably ways of dealing with that. One is looking for expert guidance. So is there somebody you can reach out to, a mentor or somebody that you can bounce that question off? Should I have spent longer in this one? Did we do it quick? What do you think? What do other people do? That would be one way of doing it. Or if you're doing the type of experiment that you're actually in contact with friendly people on, picking up the phone, having a Zoom call with somebody and just saying, I see you didn't sign. I know we did you remember we spoke a couple of weeks ago. I did an interview with you. You gave me some great insight. Thank you so much. It really helped us bring the product forward. I just wanted to check something. I don't know if you noticed, but a couple of weeks ago, I sent you out an email saying we're now live. Please sign up here because we'd really like to get you on the platform. And you haven't clicked on it. I'm just speaking to a few people that haven't clicked. And again, I'd really appreciate the open, honest feedback. Why is it you haven't clicked on that? And maybe maybe it went straight to junk. But okay, there's a problem. So it's not that they didn't sign up because they weren't interested, it's because they never saw it. Maybe that's something we need to look at and say evidence unclear on. I've just been too busy and actually I'll get onto it next week. Well, that's an interesting one for us because then you need to use your judgment and decide whether that's evidence unclear or whether actually that's representative of it not having a strong enough call to action in it. So depends on how that conversation goes, which one it is on that one. But yeah, there's often a blurry line between this pivot one and the experiment one that involves you bouncing off mentors, experts, and also reaching out to some of those people and just hearing it directly from them, what their thinking was at the time, that allows you to hopefully get enough of an indication of whether you should be adjusting and doing it slightly differently or whether you should be pivoting. Right. Okay, people, we have 12 minutes left. Whiz forwards again. Where was it? There we go. It's all gone horribly wrong. Screen sharing has stopped as the shared window has closed, it's telling me. I think I went slightly too far. Hold on, let me just bring it back. Click, 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 click. Okay, just you can't see this, but basically I've opened PowerPoint again, and as always seems to happen, it's put the presenter view and the slides the wrong way around, which means they're on the wrong screen. So I'm now swapping that around. Now I've done that, which is good. Now I can't see you anymore, so I'm minimizing something. Now I've done that. I think the screens are in the right places. Now I can finally press the share screen button. I'm only telling you this because I know what it's like. It's really boring when you sit there and you just have this silence. You've got no idea what's going on. I'm giving you a bit of behind the scenes action. And now we're hitting share, and there we go. Hopefully you should see a slide again. Yeah, magic, nodding, fantastic. Okay, so this is what we've gone through, right? We've talked through the experiment model. For those of you that were our core-entrepreneurs, I'm liking that one. Core-entrepreneurs, that will have been a recap for you. For those listening on LinkedIn, Facebook, that will have been hopefully a good walk through the process for you at a high level. We've had a talk through what you guys have done yourselves, what we haven't done, and reflected on that. We've looked at the mindset that we're trying to encompass here. And then we've looked at saying, well, rather than just looking at individual experiments, let's look at flow. Let's look at how we pull together a Kanban board and start getting ourselves into a rhythm and a cycle of continuously running experiments. plural, because we know we want to run more than one at once. We've looked at learning from those, and we've looked at how learning is not just about the learning from the experiments, but it's also learning about the process. Because if you get the process and the rhythm right now, it will grow and scale with your business. We've then looked at this kind of idea of being your own venture capitalist, deciding what you want to invest in. And that was kind of the thinking that led us into prioritization strategies. So looking at our XY model there and our 2x2 matrix, which you know I love, but also some of the other things to consider. Do we want to carry on with one thread of experiments for one particular thing, or do we want to look at other ones? And then we looked at this idea of horizon planning for McKinsey, and talked about how we can shrink this strategic model for big organizations down to something that we might want to do for our own entrepreneurial company, and decide what percentage of our time we want to allocate to the now, to the stuff a few weeks time or a few months time, and the long distance stuff in the future. How do we want to allocate that time for ourselves? And then we had to think again about how experiments go wrong. We talked about the ones that we looked at previously, but we also thought about confirmation bias, and crucially we thought about this mistake we can often make, which is going, okay, I'm through that phase now, I can move on, I'm past that. Because we're not past it, as we've learned about with Booking.com and others. And again, on the Booking.com one, do go away and read that article on HBR, because it gives you a lot of insight into how big companies use this stuff as well. So all of this leads us to pretty much the same slide as I kind of left you with last time round, which was this one. Problem happens when you don't put the first note down, just start. Now, for people that are on the Zoom session, my core-entrepreneurs, I would like all of you, not to come off mute, I'm not asking you to do that. I would like all of you to open up chat in Zoom. And I would like you, please, to write down for me what your very first step is. So we've gone from learning about what experiments are, what types of experiments there are in the last session you did. Today, we've put a lot more around that, thinking about mindset, thinking about how you turn this into a business process that scales and grows with you. We've learned from the fact that we may have all come out of the last session thinking, oh yeah, that sounds pretty straightforward, we can do that. So suddenly the uh-oh moment where we've joined today, and actually not many people have actually got an experiment done. All of this is learning, and all of this is valuable. What I would like you to do now is just put down what that very first thing is that you want to do. Don't overthink it. And importantly, don't come up with something really, really big, okay? Think about the big thing that you're doing. So Gasson has just put in there, we're currently pivoting. Great. Have a think down. What I want to know is what the very, very first step is. If you know what the experiment is that you're doing, but you haven't quite started it yet, what's the first step to starting that experiment? Who do you need to speak to? What do you need to block out in your diary? What do you need to do to make that happen? If you've not run any experiments yet, what are your biggest assumptions, and can you plot those out, and how do you make that happen? Do you need to, is your first step, I'm booking an interview with myself tomorrow morning, a 1 hour meeting that shows I'm busy to everyone else, then I'm locking myself away and doing it. Okay, so there's some coming through now. I'll read some of these because I'm not sure people on LinkedIn and Facebook can see these. So we've got user interviews. The first thing we're doing there is user interviews, Abdullah. Fantastic. So my question, I guess, is really, user interviews is something you want to do, that's great, but is there an earlier step to that? So where are these users coming from? How are you identifying them, and how are you deciding what to ask them? Because I suspect there's probably an earlier step than doing the interview. I'll watch for you coming back, but think about what that literally, after this call, if you are moving towards user interviews, what's the very first thing you need to do to make that a reality? So give me something more granular and earlier than just user interviews. And I'm watching for you to come back to me on that one. What else have we got here? We've got your mama saying, start planning the marketing messages experiments, require new users. Great. So I think we talked about maybe that would be an A/B test potentially, but we're looking at that small group of people where we're looking at getting them on board and getting them signed up. And sign up was the first step on that one. Sarah, stop starting, start finishing. Fantastic. So I would suggest that it's a great line. It's not mine. I loved it and I've stolen it. I use it a lot. But what does it actually mean? Again, so for you, Sarah, maybe your first step is after this call, jot down on a piece of paper all the things that you've got up in the air at the moment that aren't fit, all the things that are in your head whizzing around at the moment. Just treat it like a therapy session with yourself. Book yourself out some tomato time or mobile phone time, whatever it might be. Get yourself 20 minutes, because you won't need more than that, and brain dump down all the things that are in your head. I guarantee you'll feel better just for doing that. But then go back through that list and go, right, which of these can I get? What do I need to do for each of these things to get it finished? And which is the one that I can get, not which is the most important for this experiment, for this one, which is the one that I can get to done the fastest? And start with that one, get it to done, and then, importantly, put a big line through it, because that action of putting a line through it feels so good. Okay? So that's what I'd like you to do, to take this concept of stop, starting, start, finishing and make it real. Get some of that stuff out of your head, clear down some of that cycle time, free up some cycle time in your head, and then we can look at the experiments. Kamal, we've got experiment with focus group by providing them with selected house-made meals. Fantastic. This was the, I remember the business idea here. For those that don't know, the idea was actually connecting people to these home kitchens that can either pop-up ones or regular home kitchens, where people can go to a website and get a real, not processed food, but real locally cooked meals from selected places. They can go. I'm assuming it would be a regularly changing menu of people. So it was an experiment with a focus group by providing them a meal and seeing what they think of the process and getting that insight out of it. Fantastic. A bit more detail from Gaston. We've got some non-conformities, so we're figuring that out. Great, Gaston. I appreciate you might not be able to put more detail around. We are figuring it out in the time that we have and in the window, in the chat box that we have there. What I will say to you is, where you say you were figuring it out, that can be one of those things that is prone to overthinking. Time box what you are doing. If it's a group of you doing it, time box it as well. Guys, we're figuring out. We said we were figuring out last week. This week, we're still figuring out. Let's all agree that by the end of tomorrow, if not today, we are done with figuring out and we are moving forwards. I am reasonably confident that another 5 days is not going to help us figure this one out any more than deciding on it tomorrow. Let's get as much evidence or information or insight as we can tomorrow. The conversation's done tomorrow, and by the end of tomorrow, we will declare we have figured it out and we are moving forward with a direction. So avoid that paralysis of overthinking and look at how you can move it forward by using time boxing there. Yeah. And user interviews. Abdullah hasn't come back to me about user interviews and what the very first step is there, but I'm confident he's taken that on board and will be working out what his very, very first micro step is. Look, everyone, that's it from me, and that's it from these sessions that we've run. So we've had the deep dive session for our core entrepreneurs, and then we've done this wider session that everyone's been able to join in with, and I hope you've found that useful, everybody. I want to say thank you to our core entrepreneurs. Thank you for sharing with me what your businesses are about and the ideas that you're working towards. They sound great. I would love to hear how you get on. I would love to hear your stories of the experiments that you're running. I will almost certainly be doing this again for the core in the future. And if I've got your story, if you take the time to come back to me and tell me your stories, good, bad, ugly, tell me those stories, because those stories will become part of the narrative that we give to the next wave of entrepreneurs coming through. And you will be doing your thing to make their journey that little bit less painful and that little bit easier for them. So they will learn from your experience, and it makes it richer as well. I see that there is a questionnaire that has gone into chat for our core entrepreneur people. Please, I'm sure you know the drill already, fill in the assessment form. That feedback does go to everybody, as well as the core looking at those things. I get those as well, and it genuinely is valuable for me to see your feedback. And I do look at those, and I do think about how I can refine and improve sessions. So make those as verbose as you feel comfortable with, and I promise you they get read, they get listened to, and they do improve these sessions going forwards. Is there anything I've missed? No.
I think that's it. Thank you very much for this interesting session, John. And thank you to everyone else for attending. And like John said, please fill out the session assessment form. It only takes like less than a minute. And of course, John is going to be available for one-on-one coaching sessions that you can book through me or through the service support request form. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Magic. Thank you, everyone. Happy experimenting.
Thank you.
And don't forget to get that first note down.